Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Why don't you let us know? Can you hear us? Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us and see us, and maybe share where you're joining from. And we'll get started here in just a minute. All right, we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to Bulb Digital's Office Hours. We do this once a month, every first Wednesday. We like to just kind of open our door and give people an opportunity to ask questions. Sometimes people might not have budget or whatnot to like engage us in a sort of project, and we thought, how cool would it be if we could just kind of open our doors and help people? And, yeah, it kind of makes for a fun online event, and we get to spend some time with all of you. So we love doing that. We are streaming to both Teams and YouTube. So those of you on the Teams meeting, you can feel free to drop any questions that you have in chat. And if you want to raise your hand, we can allow you to come off mute so we can have some back and forth. Those of you on YouTube, you guys just have chat. So feel free to drop any questions over there. What else do we have? We have both Matt and Mike in here today. They mentioned it last time, but this is in our new little studio space down the hallway. It's been fun to have kind of a dedicated space. We don't have to get in other people's hair, and get to have this sort of set up relatively permanently. So that's what you're seeing here. And part of that is the result of all of you guys watching. It's been a kind of a fun wave to ride, and yeah, dedicate some space and budget to all this. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt and Mike, and we'll go ahead and get started with some questions.
Good deal. Thanks, Mitch. Welcome, everybody.
So I think we had some questions that came in between last month, this month that we wanted to go over. I think both of the questions came from Tanya, who's on the call right now. So that would be good. And if she wants to come off mute and have a conversation about it, she's more than welcome to. The first question was really, I know that last couple times we've been talking, she's been working on an app that has quite a few UI elements, and she's been making it very responsive. But she's having a problem where on one particular screen, she can't get the content to really be as responsive as she wants it to be. And so we looked a little bit at what you had, and really the scenario that you have has a container inside a container inside a container. And I know originally, or you have one that's like horizontal, and then another horizontal, and then or a vertical, horizontal, and then another control. It's very difficult to troubleshoot those things. So if you wanted to, we wanted to talk about it a little bit more, we can. However, I set up something that was very similar to what you have, and I was able to get it to work. I was able to get it to be centered as it expanded and contracted. The most important pieces that I think may or may not be an issue for you has to do with your, I think you call it ConMet SCM main, your main, which is your main horizontal container. It has to be justified and aligned center. So that makes sure that all of the content within it will be justified. So in the center of the screen, both vertically and horizontally. And it also needs to fill the space, which I think it already is. I think you're currently automatically set based on what the upper container is to fill the space. The next thing, I don't know that you really...
Could you maybe, just for people watching, show the images or whatever, maybe download?
Yeah, Tanya, are you okay? Are you okay with having the images shown? If you want to do a thumbs up, you can. I don't want to... You're okay. Okay. I just didn't want to show it. That's why I wasn't automatically showing it, is I didn't want to... So give me just a minute, and I'll have that so everybody can see. Cool. Let me... here. Okay. Let me see. I can zoom in. So, are you guys sharing the screen? Yeah. Okay. So this is the the structure that she has in her app, and then if I can get it to go to the next one, there we go. And then this is what the app looks like normally, and then This is an example on a wider screen resolution where you can see that, this space on the right-hand side, it's supposed to be centered, and it's no longer centered. So when I was messing around with it, the issue, basically this top one needs to have horizontally and vertically, it needs to be centered. This particular control, I don't know that you really need it at all. This control, I think you can do it just with this inside of this one. I don't know, but maybe you have another thing below it. So maybe there's a reason to have the secondary container, but I don't think you need it. In my case, all I really had to do at that point was make sure that this was set to a fixed width and height, so that it would then automatically take the alignment that is set here in that upper container. When you have it justified and you have it aligned center, this container here, once that is set to a fixed size, it should just always be centered. So that's the main things that I saw. Tanya, I don't know, like I said before, if you wanted to come off mute, you could, and see whether or not, because I don't see the properties, maybe you have some of those things set and you're still having the problem. Is she allowed to unmute right now? I think we're taking you out. We're allowing you to come off mute now. Yep. You should be able to come off mute if you want to chat.
Hey guys, thanks. So horizontal and vertical should be center on everything. Is that basically what you're
It doesn't
on
have to
all
be
the containers?
Yeah, not on all the containers. The most important one is this one, the main
Screen main, yeah.
Yeah. So this one is the most important because in doing that, the sub container, when you set it to be a smaller width and height, it's going to automatically center that control, because basically what you're saying is take the contents that's inside this control and put it to be centered vertically and horizontally. And then, like I said, the other key is that this particular control and this control need to have a smaller size. It needs to be, whatever the size of your actual content actually is. And what that will do is it'll actually allow it to be centered. There is one other thing that I think I took note of, which is I think you need to make sure that this one isn't set to expand vertically or horizontally, because sometimes you can have that, again, fill the space, and you don't want to have that set on this control. But I think doing that will resolve your problem.
Okay, yeah, I'll go through them all again. The regular, that one you're pointing at right now, the CNTR Met, is just a regular container, not a horizontal or a vertical, and I don't have any. Oh, it has flexible width on.
Correct. Yeah, you don't want it to have flexible width.
I don't want it on. Okay.
Yep, and then you want to set the width to be what you want. And then once you have that,
it's set to parent.
It's the width is set to parent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what you want it to be fixed width to be whatever your content is, 500 pixels, 1,000 pixels, whatever that is. It looks like your content is pretty rigid in regards to its width of the actual content. And so all you should have to do is set that to be something smaller. You could even test it quickly by just turn that flexible width off and then set the width to be, something pretty small, or, maybe 1,000 or something, 1024. And that may just solve it for you right there.
Okay, I'll give it a shot.
Cool. So then the other question that we had come in was also from Tanya. That was one that you were working on, Mike, or looked at?
Yeah, the question was in a gallery view on a SharePoint list, how do you format it so that you can see more of your content? So how do you change the height specifically in the case that you have a field that is maybe long, or you're trying to cram a bunch of different fields on there and not all of the data is fitting? So I do have an example worked up that I can kind of walk through with you guys. So I've got an issues list here. I've got it in card view already. And in order to do what you're trying to do, you're going to want to basically format the current view. And you'll want to switch it to basically the advanced mode, which will give you the ability to edit the JSON that is behind the list format. And in addition to formatting the columns, you can actually manipulate basically the HTML that's behind it. So the key thing to understand here is that this JSON that is built here is made up, basically, it's generating a bunch of HTML for each of these records in the list. So you have to find the field, for example, that you want to manipulate. And so you do have to know a little bit about kind of what you're doing here. In this case, I've got a field down at the bottom, let's say, that is got some extra content in it, and I want to make sure that I show the entirety of that field. So the first thing I'm going to go do is look for that issue description field, which I know in this case is going to be way down at the bottom. And you can kind of look through here and find some indicators of what your field names are. So here's that description field right here. Here's that text content. And by default, it had a height set of 40 pixels. So if I simply wanted to make that larger, I can set that to 140 pixels. But then in order for that to actually work, you have to set the overall height of the card itself. So I'm going to jump right up here to the top. And there should be a height and width in the top of the card as well. And so this height is set to 599. So I'm going to basically up it by 100, which is what I increased the specific column by. So I'm going to make it 699. And then I'm going to go ahead and preview that. And you'll notice that it made my card larger. And so then if I look at those particular items, I can see all of the text in there. I think another thing to note here that I found pretty useful, in the case of this issue description, it's already got it applied, but it's basically allowing multi-line content. So another thing that I've run into is a scenario where you're using this card view and you have titles that are long, and so you can't read the entirety of the title. And so this is an example of that. So the key thing here to understand is there is basically a CSS class that's being applied to this issue description, for example, that is allowing it to break lines or go to multi-line. So I'm going to go back down to that particular field, and I'm going to look for that class. And so I happen to kind of know what I'm looking for, but it's this SP card multi-line class. And so the little secret here that you can use is you can basically copy this class, and we're going to go find our title column, which should be up here toward the top. And so here is that title column right here. So there's where the title is getting plugged in, and these are all of the classes that are currently being applied to it. And you can simply come in here and paste any of these other classes to it as kind of a little cheat, and preview that. And now I've actually wrapped that issue title. And so those are just some simple examples of some of the things that you can do. Really all this again is JSON that is declaring the HTML, if you will, that is going to be used to display these cards.
Tanya just gave you a big heart reaction.
Love it. I love the hearts.
So if we can switch over to my screen, Tanya, I just wanted to show you like what I whipped up when I was playing around with it, just to maybe help explain it a little more. So like I have a container, and then a container. This container is set to be justify, center, and then align center as well. But it also doesn't have like no wrapping. Like it's set to fill the screen. In your case, it would fill whatever the spaces that you have previously. This container is set to space between, expand the height, so make it as big as it needs to be. And the big thing here is that this one, like I said before, I don't think you need this because this is basically just set to container one width and height. So it's set to the width of this container. And like I said before, I don't think you need it at all. But then container one, if you look at this, it's set to be 300, 300, center align, and then the width is 300 and the flexible's off. And if I were to play this on a bigger screen or a smaller screen, like whatever it is, like if I preview it, and as I make it smaller, big, it's going to stay centered. So hopefully that helps.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I think I got it to work while you guys were talking. I'm doing it right. So, and I think it's working. So I'll just have to test it on some other people to make sure. But
awesome.
Is there a better way, or is there any way to get? Because the reason I was using the regular container instead of just a horizontal or a vertical was because I was trying to overlap things. Is there any way to overlap stuff in a horizontal or vertical container?
No.
No?
Intent,
okay.
yeah, the intent
I wanted to make sure I didn't miss something.
No, the intent of those is to make it so that you have them next to each other, or either horizontally or vertically. So yeah, there's no way to do that. The only way to do it is with a container.
Do those have accessibility issues when they're?
It depends on the content you're talking about. As long as we're talking about content that is, because you can put on all of the tags, you can put the screen reader order, etc. You can order things. You know, you may have to do some custom things if you're overlapping stuff. But again, it depends on the content. If you're talking image and text, like having the image that has an alt text that is the same as the text already, that's the screen reader text, that does a lot for it. And then if you could even remove the text from the order in the screen reader altogether because you've already got it on the image, I think. I believe that would work. Okay. So it's not necessarily a problem. It's not like you can't do it, but you may have to do some more work to make sure that it's good.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Cool. So those were the only questions that we had that came in like through the normal channels over the last little bit. But we do have some questions, or this is a time that we can take questions either from chat or, you know, if you raise your hand, we can let you off mute so you can ask a question.
So it looks like there is a question on YouTube.
Yep, we did have a question on YouTube.
Someone's asking, how did we add the CSS again, please? So go ahead and share my screen again, and I'll just dive right back into that. So on your list view, whichever view that you're on, assuming you're in a gallery view, you can format the view. And by default, and I might actually switch this back. So I'll switch back to design mode. And this is going to go basically break everything that I just did. I'll go ahead and download this JSON just so I have it. Actually, I'm going to do this, make it easier for me. So I'm going to switch back to design mode. And that'll basically dump everything out that I had in there. Let me go back and do that again and actually dump it. Got to save it. Okay. So now, out of the box, if you jump into design mode, by formatting the current view. Louder? Okay, I'm being told louder. No problem.
Guys, he likes to put on this DJ voice. He thinks he
doesn't really sound like that.
He thinks he sounds smooth, but doesn't realize he can just talk normal volume.
I'll let the audience decide. So in any event, you're going to choose the card designer, in which case you can select your fields that you want. And so you might select whatever fields you want, but then you're going to flip to advanced mode. And this is where you get that JSON snippet that we were looking at before. And so all that's really going on here is this is JSON that is basically declaring the HTML that's going to be displayed for the card, as well as the HTML pieces, components, if you will, that are going to be displayed for each of the columns on the card. And so basically you can manipulate this to your heart's content. But basically all that I was showing in our particular scenario was that in the description, by default, because it's a multi-line field in the list, it has this style applied to it, this SP card multi-line, which basically tells it to wrap. And so I simply copied that and I stole it, and I decided I wanted it to be included on my title field. So up here at the top where my title was displayed, I simply pasted it here, basically to make that multi-line because I knew that it was a long text value. And so then once you do that, it basically allows you to wrap that top line. So that's basically how that happened. Hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to post another comment if you have more.
Cool. The one comment I will make on it is that in that case, we're not actually adding custom CSS. We're just taking existing custom class CSS classes and reusing them. So it's in JSON, and what Mike was doing was just taking existing well-known CSS tags and moving them around and applying them to some other spots.
Yeah, that was actually a secondary response to the original question, which was, I've got a column that has a lot of text in it. I want to make the height bigger, right? Which is where we started. So.
Yep. Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing right now in chat. So unless somebody else has a question,
if you guys have questions, post them in chat somewhere, either in Teams or in YouTube, and we'll stand by.
Yeah.
All right, Melanie has a question. She says, in SharePoint column formatting, she's trying to pass the item URL as a parameter to PowerApps. But when it comes into Power Automate, it has the ID is removed. This is an interesting question.
So, so if I understand that right, Melanie, you are creating a column formatting that basically creates your own URL. That URL goes to, you said Power App, but then you also say Power Automate. So it's pointing to which thing? A Power Automate? If it's going to a Power Automate to start it, but then you're saying that you can't get to the ID in the Power Automate?
Yeah, so if successful, right, in the URL, you'd pass a value in the query string, and in your Canvas app, you would sniff that in the params collection, right?
Oh, Power App, then a Power Automate. Okay, so then you're saying you go to a Power App, you're passing it as a parameter in the URL, and then you try to take that and then send that value off, and you're getting that in the Power App using the, I think it's URL parameters or something. Params.
It's the params collection.
Collection is that. Which, Melanie, if you want to come off mute, you should be able to. I think if you want to just ask, we can discuss it a little bit. And if,
sorry.
Yeah, you're off mute. We can hear you.
Oh, I'm off mute. Yeah, so I'm just, so I've put the parameters in the Power App, but I want the link to the specific item to be passed to the Power App, and then the Power App then triggers a workflow. So when it passes the URL to the workflow, it loses the ID at the end. So it'll have like display form.aspx, but the ID will have been removed.
Yep.
But when I look at, so it's a button column that I've added to SharePoint. So when you click that, you can see that the URL, the ID is in the URL, so it passes it, but then somehow it loses it between Power Apps and Power Automate.
So the first thing I would say is in your Power App, I would create a label and display the parameter that you're getting. That will prove that you're actually getting the ID into Power Apps. Because the first question is whether or not it's actually getting into Power Apps, or if, because just because you see it in the URL, because when you said you see it in the URL, I assume you mean the URL that you actually go to. And in that case, you may see it in the URL, but you may not actually be getting the whole thing into Power Apps. So that would be the first thing I would check.
Okay.
Assuming that it is getting into Power Apps and it's a problem truly sending it on to Power Automate, which I think I would, if I had to guess, I think that that's pretty unlikely. But if that's the problem, I'm sure it has something to do with encoding, because what you're doing is you're setting a URL inside of a URL. And so when you're doing that, there can be lots of problems where what you really need is to replace the ampersand or the question mark that would happen at the end to something else that, it would be called in programming worlds escaping it to make it understandable.
An encoded URL, right?
Yeah, yep, an encoded URL. But the question I would have is whether or not you need to do that in Power Apps or whether or not you need to do that in SharePoint. If I had to guess, it's a problem with how SharePoint is passing that on to something in Power Apps, but I'm not 100% sure.
There's also a few different ways you could deal with it as well. So can I ask how you're triggering your Power Automate flow from your Power App?
So it's on it's a form. It's like an edit form, and then when they click submit, it's on that. So
okay, so the submit button is calling flowname.run.
Yeah.
Okay.
JSON, and then passing
passing something into it. So one thing to note is technically if you wanted to make this a little bit simpler to troubleshoot, is you don't need to pass the entire URL to Power Automate. You could just pass the ID. So if you're struggling with figuring out if the URL is getting broken or if it's not encoded right or something like that, you could simply pick up on whatever the ID is from that URL that's coming into the Power App and simply pass the ID on alone. And you could, at least for a temporary period of time, have the Power Automate hard code it to point at the list and go get that ID, right? Go get the item by the ID. Yeah. So that would be another way to simplify your solution a little bit to try to help troubleshoot that scenario. as opposed to passing the entire URL around. Now, the one shortcoming to that is that if you're dealing in a scenario where you might have a dev environment and a test environment and a production environment, let's say different SharePoint lists on different SharePoint site collections, you'll need to come up with a way to manage that if you move to that solution long term.
Yeah, so another option that that's exactly where I was going with it, was assuming that you needed that flexibility to be able to point to multiple, you could also pass in multiple parameters. You could pass a parameter that is like, here's the list, here's the ID, and the list could be like even the list name or the list, another parameter that would allow you to do that, so you don't end up with this giant encoded URL.
Right.
Which, you should be able to deal with the encoded URL, but you just may find it easier to pass the ID or pass, different pieces.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think maybe like I can set a variable to add the ID onto the end of the URL. Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Not a problem.
Cool. Just to kind of reset the room for a second. You're watching Bulb Digital Office Hours. We open our doors once a month to have you come ask any questions you might need help with. So far, we've been handling rather technical questions in nature, but do want to remind if there's anything more broad, more high level that you're struggling with at your organization, you're welcome to ask too. Kind of runs the gamut on the type of questions that we get, but wanted to encourage that. One of the typical prompts that I like to give is, if you're thinking about maybe a couple years from now at your organization, you have a goal. What is preventing you from getting to that goal that maybe we might be able to help with? So maybe use that prompt as a way to think of some questions, and we'll continue on.
Cool.
I think I'll give us some.
I have a question I'll ask.
Okay.
So this is something I ran into a couple weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to pick the brain of the smartest man I know. So I'm going to do it right now. And you may not have an answer, but if you do, it'd be really awesome. So I bumped into a scenario with a customer who has a model-driven app, and we have a dev, test, and production environment.
Yep.
And for some reason, in the production environment, display name values, so column headings, on standard out-of-the-box Dataverse tables disappeared. So it really became a problem, because you could be looking at a view of data, let's say your task data, which is an out-of-the-box thing, and if you wanted to add columns to your view, like your own customized personal view, or you wanted to filter it based on different columns, you would click on edit columns or edit filters, and you couldn't select those columns because they didn't exist, because those display names were non-existent. Now in the view itself, if you had those columns present in your view as part of your deployment, the columns were there, they just had no headings. So that was the other indicator. And for the life of me, I could not figure out what the difference was between the production environment and the other environments. And then I woke up 48 hours later, and the problem had solved itself.
It fixed itself. And it hasn't come back again?
And it has not come back again.
Well, my first comment is Microsoft weirdness. But more seriously, the thing I would first think about is the solution package, and what's in the solution package and how it's configured. You've done deployments since then. I'm pretty sure I know which customer you're talking about. You've done deployments since then, and it hasn't come up again?
That's correct.
Even in a, almost immediately you check it, and it's still...
No, it's not a problem. The other thing that I noticed as I was trying to solve the problem is there were other settings at the environment level where I would go into the email settings, where it does email synchronization and stuff. And in that environment, if I would go to the email settings, it would throw an error, basically saying something was wrong. And then I would go directly back to the same settings screen, and it would show up just fine.
It sounds to me like some, I know in that environment, I don't know that you could have checked the admin center for any communications.
I did. So I did check the admin center. I actually also, I didn't do a full support request, but I reported an issue, which they investigated, and then they said there's no issue. Right.
They said there was no issue?
They said there was no known issue happening. And so then my next course of action, the next morning, was I'm going to raise a ticket.
Yeah. Okay.
And
it was fixed.
And by 10:30 in the morning, it was gone.
Yeah. It sounds to me like they were rolling something out and something got lost. And that would be my guess.
But I don't think the customer noticed it.
Only that environment.
Yeah. And I don't think the customer noticed it, but it was bothering me.
Yeah.
Because I knew
it's really annoying.
as soon as they went
Yeah,
to try
it's
to
a
like
problem.
change a filter, they were going to be like, "Hey, there's a problem."
Yeah, it's definitely a problem.
So,
how was your experience with that admin center thing? My last experience with that was quite good in regards to, well, good and bad. Like you say, oh, there's a problem. I didn't actually get something back. I didn't get nothing told me. Oh, it. But my issue got resolved.
yeah.
I didn't have to submit a support ticket, and
so when I submitted it, it gives you visibility into the status of it. So, and the immediate response was, "We'll give you an update in 30 minutes," which is cool.
Yep.
So I had an email saying like, "Here, this is your ticket or whatever.
Yep.
This is your thing has been submitted," and then I basically monitored it. And I think it was in an investigating state for probably an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then it became there was no known issue, right? And so what they were really looking for is like systemic big issues that are happening, and so there wasn't. So it was something in that environment.
Yeah.
And I just I was in a situation where I really want to know what this is, because if it's something I did, right?
You don't want to have it happen again. Yeah.
But
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting feature and tool that they have in the admin center for that purpose. Yeah. I noticed it or started using it probably, I don't know, 3-4 months ago. I think it's been around for quite a long time, but it's the first time I actually used it, and it was great in one way. And then the other piece of it that was frustrating for me was, I think in my case, I don't remember getting the tracking that you were talking about. But what I remember was a short time later, it just got fixed. And it's like, oh, cool. I didn't have to talk to a support agent, get to the third level support agent, do a bunch of troubleshooting. Like, they actually had somebody that went in and fixed it.
Yeah, if they're actually paying attention to that and resolving issues if they find them, I think it's a great tool, because it's very passive. Because in our experience, when we've created actual tickets with Microsoft and it gets to that level, it becomes a thing where now you need to be available when they are ready to talk to you. And
well, it's interesting too, because they are willing to allow their senior engineers to get involved at that level when they don't have to get on a call with the customer necessarily.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a nice tool.
So I saw another question come in. I have an environment variables and use them in my flows. I tried to add a new flow and use the variables, but they are not available. Added flow from within solution. Okay. I had to copy an existing flow and basically delete everything to use variables.
I think I ran into this one. It's janky, but if you save the flow and then go back and try to edit it, I'm pretty sure the environment
they come back.
So hang on. There is janky stuff in Power Automate. I can testify to that. So here's what I've noticed. If you're in a solution, chances are you're in PowerApps. And if you create your Cloudflow from PowerApps, it stays in that same PowerApps world. The developer environment is PowerApps. If you, after you save the flow, after you've created it the first time, and then go back into the solution, find that flow, and edit it in a new tab, it will open in a Power Automate environment. And my guess is that was the problem. If you open it in the Power Apps environment, probably it doesn't pick up that the environment variables are there, because it's not the full-blown Power Automate IDE, if you will. The other thing to note that can be a difference is that, and if I strongly urge you to use it, is turn on, the experimental features for Power Automate, and you'll just have a better overall developer experience in terms of selecting content from the dynamic.
She's got they got a second part. Let's talk about that. But I want to we can show that in a minute.
Sure.
There's some pluses and some minuses to using it, but I also would recommend to enable it. But we can show that in a second. The second part, when I substituted variables for the hard-coded info, working with Excel connector, ran into trouble. Do I need a variable for each library, folder, file, table to be able to make use of the site variable with this connector? Do I need a separate? I don't think so. There is a weirdness in the. Let me see. I think I can. Yeah. So I'm just gonna bring it up quick to see if I can verify we're talking about the same thing. My recollection of the Excel connector is that there's like a site, and then there's like a folder, but like the folder isn't really a folder. It's really an ID. But I'm gonna look here quick. Instant. Configure. so I'm going to do Excel. Excel business. And then let's do get row. So I think if this does what I think it's going to do, yeah. So you get a location, which is like a SharePoint site, and then you've got the document library, and then you've got a file, but this file is actually like a folder. Actually, let me see. I don't know. Let's try this one. We'll see. I don't know if that I've got something here. We'll see. Documents, and then file. Yeah, there's just no items in here. So I don't know that I have a good example. I might have to find something to throw. But I think this creates like an ID. It's not like, it looks like it's text. And if I had to guess your problem, this isn't quite right because it's not what you think it is. I'm trying to remember how we can look at what it is. But this particular thing is not the same as these. And it is like an ID. Is what it wants. And I don't remember how to solve that. Let me see. You don't know anything on the MJOS tenant that's got like a Excel file in it somewhere. Let me just go. I'll add it. This is COVID something. Let's see. Let me see if I can add something quick. So let's see. I'll sign in here. Come on. Okay, and I think, yeah, this one, general files. Come on. Cool. New Excel. Let's see what happens now when I click this. Yep, so we got general, Excel. So this is here. But then if I do P code, this is like, the drive is really like this weird thing. And let me see if I can find the other one. Yeah, no, but this one isn't. This is like / whatever, yeah. So I forget. So this one's this. This other one has the drive has a special location. So I think that's part of the problem is that some of them require different things, and I can't exactly remember. I had a very similar problem, and I don't exactly remember what it was. Tanya, this was you that was asking the question. I think I would try to create a regular variable instead of environment variable and verify that you can get it to work with a regular variable. And if you can, then it's a problem with environment variables, and we could like you could think about that. But have you ever done either SharePoint or
I'm actually looking
Excel?
I'm looking for an example right now.
I know that I have, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't have an example right off the bat that I could pull up. But I know you can do it. So it's just a matter of figuring out what it is. It looks like there were some more comments here. Let me.
I can walk through that other difference in editing a Power Automate as well here before I dive too far looking for that. So if you want to share my screen, I can talk about what I was saying. So if you're in a solution and you're saying, oh, I'm going to create a cloud flow, and you say create a new cloud flow, and we'll just do an instant one here. Call it test flow 2, and you do this, it's going to basically stay in this PowerApps IDE, if you will. And so the thing, like you can build stuff here. So I can come in here and I can, add a step. For example, we'll do this and save it. And you can do work here, but there are some shortcomings. And so the thing that I would tell you is I would encourage you to, after you've created it, to go back here and then open it this way. And this, for whatever reason, is smarter and opens it in the Power Automate IDE or the Flow IDE. And the nice thing about this is that you can then come into here into your Power Automate settings, and you can use like the experimental features, which you can't use in the PowerApps world. And so then when you turn that on, for example, it'll reload your flow for you. And that's once you turn that on, that's turned on for your user, basically for any flows that you're manipulating in that environment. But then you can come in here, and this is one of the big changes, the big things that's different is your ability to manipulate the data that you're using by selecting from the dynamic values or manipulating an expression is even more powerful. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and add an input here. We'll just add a text variable, call it data1. And if I wanted to use that in my compose in an expression, for example, let's say I want to uppercase it just as a simple thing. So I've got my expression, that's my uppercase function, but then I can use this little tab down here to dive into the dynamic values and go after my input variable, and it'll plug it right into my expression, and then I can save it, and I'm done. So that's a bit more streamlined when you're working inside of your flow and manipulating it than it is without the experimental features, which you cannot turn on in that PowerApps version of the flow editor. So that was the thing that I wanted to show. Hopefully that's helpful.
I am just creating an example using, because I don't think I have time to get all of the other stuff going, but I should be able to test out this. But I guess I have to have it. Are you sharing my screen at all? Yeah, go ahead and share my screen if you would. So I've got an Excel file, and let's see, we'll do format as table. It's fine, my table has headers, yep. And then table design, table 1. So let's see if I can get this to work. And see if I can make this happen. Only literal expression types may be used. Is this the same, Tanya? Is this the same kind of error that you were getting?
No, my problem with that was because my file didn't have a table in it. I had that happen to me, but once I got the table to read, it worked fine.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's just putting in gibberish. When I put in the first environmental variable, I'm guessing it's those codes you're talking about, but then I can't go find the right value.
So,
or put in another variable because that's why I wondered if I had to create a variable for the file to plug in instead.
So what I was doing, I'll walk you through this for a second, and I don't know that I can get it all the way going because it looks like I've got a problem.
Oh, it's okay.
But I think, which this may be just a problem because
there you go.
Yeah, now this is here, but
it wasn't caught up, maybe.
The question is whether or not, yeah, okay, so I got table 1, and I got, yep, this is my column, key value of 1, whatever, right? But when you try to switch this, the way you do that is you come down here and do enter custom value. And the moment you do that, and I put in, let's do compose 1. This happens.
Yeah. Yep.
Which this is the idea of the library. But what you can do
is going to change in the new environment. That's why I wondered if I needed new.
Yeah, but what you should be able to do is do custom value here, and then you should be able to again choose like the environment variable for the document library, and then from here, this doesn't seem to work for me, and I think it has to do with the fact that these aren't quite right. I can't remember whether or not I need to.
Well, is your second output legit?
This? You mean this one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because if it's not, I think because I know where you're going with it. If it is legitimate, if it's the right ID, it should work.
Yeah. So let's do this then. Let's verify this, because what you could do here would be put in this, and then here choose documents, and then go back up to the top and choose custom value, which will give me the compose 1, which will give me this value.
Copy that.
Let me copy this and put this up here. And then now come in here and do custom value.
I think that will work.
Like this. And then what does this do? No.
No, it doesn't like it.
But
See,
won't the library
Put the
ID change between environments?
yeah, but
so
if this
do
was
I-
an environment variable, like I
That's
would
what I
change-
mean. So
change that from a compose to a variable.
So I just have to create more environment variables to make it work.
I
I'd
think
have to do
so,
it for
yeah.
every file. Every file and every library and everything is gonna have
Well,
variables.
no, not necessarily, because there's also a OneDrive or something.
And mine are on SharePoint.
Oh, it's
so-
SharePoint. Okay.
Sorry, but yeah.
No, you know
That's
you're
all I
good.
have.
There
That's
is
all I have.
there is like a get lists, get lists and libraries. Like I think you can do this and
okay.
search for by name, like give the site address, and so in this case it's like this, and then and I don't like this one is like get all of them. I think there's another one that but I think you can get that ID dynamically based on name. Like I don't know that you have to go through all of this whole process to be able to do that. Table might be a different problem for you. I don't know. I'm not familiar with I don't know are you using the get row?
I'm using the get list rows present.
Got it. So then maybe you don't need. Well, no, I guess you do need.
I still have the table,
Yeah, you
yeah,
still have the
and it's
table.
always table 1. So I mean, I know what it's gonna. Yeah, that's a fixed. That's not gonna change no matter which environment it's in. So
Yeah, it
that
shouldn't.
should be a fixed amount.
Yeah.
Or fixed value.
But I would try that. I think that would work for
Okay.
you. I don't have anything that I could set up 100% that
No,
might work.
that's
but,
fine.
I think
I can run that.
I think that's what you would need to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool.
As usual.
Not a problem at all. So I think we're getting close to the end of our time. Again, if there's any questions from YouTube or from Teams, feel free to either raise your hand or put something in chat, and we'll be happy to talk about it. Talking about the audio. Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, we'll look forward to you next time. Oh, the new cards and PowerApps. Yeah. I know, Mitch, you were looking at it. Mike, did you look at that?
Talking about
yeah,
adaptive cards? Yeah. So one of our team members was actually looking at that.
It's not adaptive cards. It's cards.
Cards.
Yeah. They were looking at it 100%. Like somebody was. I just don't know who it was. Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, I know a little bit about it. I can walk through it a little bit. We had somebody else on the team that was investigating
It's
a little
using
bit.
the same declarative.
I mean, it's similar. It's like taking adaptive cards but making it more integrated into the developer experience.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly the same.
Right.
At all. Like it's not.
Like, why don't you take Tanya's while Matt figures out Melanie's?
Yeah. So Tanya asked, maybe she's asked before, how do we document our apps and flows? So that's a good question. There are a lot of different places where you can like add comments into your flows. So one of the things I like to do is I like to, rather than just use the out of the box like name for the action or the trigger or whatever it is, try to be a little bit more descriptive. So you can always come in here and rename that to whatever you want it to be, right? And then the other thing to note in your flows is you also have the ability to add comments. And so then you can add comments to those actions, whatever they are. And the intent of doing those things is you give the next person that comes along and is looking at that and trying to adapt that for their own purpose, or maybe they're maintaining it, right? It gives them the ability to kind of understand your thought process and what the intent was and what it does, without hopefully having to like sift through every little bit of logic that you got going on. So that would be kind of the first thing I would tell you in terms of documenting your flows. There's not, when you think about like traditional application development, there's not any real great automated tools for like spitting out documentation or help manuals. That's actually a thing that we have experience with in our past, where you could, there were tools out there you could license and actually point them at your application, and they would basically go through all of your screens and generate a bunch of help documentation that you could then like fit into your app or build into your application. That really doesn't exist. So it's all about, kind of documenting in the comments and in any kind of, like if you're using variables and collections and things like that inside of PowerApps, be descriptive with those as well. And in addition to that, if you're writing any low code inside of PowerApps, you can always add comments. So if you've got any kind of lengthy thing happening, let's say in an on visible of a screen, or if you're still using app on start, for example, you've got a lot of stuff going on there, comment it profusely. That could be a very kind of helpful way to document what's going on.
So the other thing I would say is that specific to this, there's a whole governance model around PowerApps, Power Automate, et cetera, that helps with a lot of this. Like the question I would have is, what's the reason why you're talking about documenting? Is it developer documentation for individuals who would have to maintain this? In which case, everything that Mike's talking about, I think, is 100% right, valid, and these are not mutually exclusive. But there's a whole other thing, which is like we're IT, or we're involved in managing environments and managing the content that's used across an enterprise, and asking questions like, what's the purpose? What's the data classification for this application? What type of data is it using? All of that kind of stuff is a whole nother level of documentation that's a little bit more meta. It's not documentation about what everything does, but it would honestly be kind of the starting point for me when I talk about these things, right? Like, we have this application that is this is the purpose, this is the data that it involves, these are the people that it involves. Like, I don't know that I would go down to user story level, but like high level, this is what's going on. And then that in turn builds into, and it uses these flows in these environments with this solution, like all of that kind of stuff.
And even just to expand on that a little bit further, you can even think of scenarios where if you're in a large enterprise, chances are, and you're a PowerApps developer, chances are you might not have access to the production environment.
Yeah.
So you're going to create a solution package, for example, that needs to get deployed to test and then maybe deployed to production. There are some ALM tools in place that can be used for some of that, but that's a thing that maybe you need to document as well, as if you're going to hand that package to the IT team responsible for that production environment. What are the steps they need to go through to deploy it?
Configure.
What are the other things that surround it, that support it, that need to exist? And what are the environment variable configurations that need to exist,
example is exactly what Tanya was talking about, right? Like you're moving from environment A to environment B. If you're not the one deploying it, you need to document and say, hey, here's how these environment variables should be configured. If you have ALM, you can oftentimes configure that as part of the ALM solution to deploy it. If you don't, you definitely need to document all of that stuff.
Yep.
On the question about cards, the environment that I have that's in my demo environment actually doesn't have cards, so I can't show it. But we will come, I'll add it to our thing for next time, and we'll, for sure on the next office hours, go through a little bit of demo and walk through on cards. Maybe we can even have, I know Michaela was looking at it, like I would love to look at it between now and then a little bit deeper, but maybe she can join to next time and show off what it is.
I also don't have it in my little
sandbox
environment.
It may be that I don't have, it's a preview, so it may be that I just didn't turn on the preview.
It's possible.
In that environment, but it's also possible in my little demo environment, it's not deployed to that environment yet. So, cool.
Did you see Tanya's comment here?
No, sorry. Let me quick. Yep. Who may support? Yep. So future me, because I forgot, and anyone, which that's yep. I'm with you. I'm right there with you. And anyone who may support it afterwards, and then yes for scaling, etc. I have framework I use for my Excel tools, Power Query, VBA, but it does not really lend itself to Power Platform. Yeah, got it. Civ Dev, citizen developer with default and production environments only at this point. If it scales, then it could be IT supported at some point. Yep. So yeah, for what you're talking about, like a lot of the stuff that Mike said is true. I would tell you that whole documentation thing is one of the more difficult things in the Power Platform. Mostly because when you talk about having 5 different people trying to maintain the same thing, there's a million different ways to do kind of the same thing.
Well, and honestly, the biggest challenge with it is developing a standard, right? Because you're going to do it one way and I'm going to do it a different way and Tiny's going to do it another way. And in the traditional custom app dev world, we have the ability to enforce those standards even with comments through that whole check-in process, right? Through that ALM tools. And that just does not, that piece does not exist, right? You don't have a great way to make sure that that's
sort of exists, but it's at its infancy.
It's clunky.
At best.
It's clunky.
Right? Like it is super infant. Just to be clear, Tanya, what we're talking about is like, which I don't know how familiar you are with a lot of the, what people would call pro dev tools, but in a pro dev environment, you would have a code repository. I would make a branch. I would create code that I would then check in, and then I would say, cool, I'm ready to merge it. And then when I merge it in, they don't just let you merge in. You're going to have a code review that somebody else goes and looks at and says, yep, I agree with it. I don't agree with it. Also, there's a bunch of automated tools that say, hey, we don't agree. Like our standard is like your naming, you have a naming convention for how you name screens and controls, which is great. Like that would enforce it. It would be like, hey, this doesn't conform to our naming convention. We're not going to approve this. This isn't going to happen. We're not going to let you go in. All of that stuff I think is eventually going to be coming to the Power Platform as it gets more mature. It's not there today. A lot of it has to do with, understanding the tools, understanding the methodology, and trying to standardize on what you're trying to do. But it definitely is a challenge. What Mike said as 100% way I've handled it, which is copious comments, copious information about what it is right in the tool. So not a separate document, not a separate thing, but like right in the top of in the on visible or in the, whatever you're doing. If it's something really complicated, hey, this is how this works. So you can remember, as you mentioned, like when you come back to it in 6 months, you remember what you were doing. Leadership culture, if separate document. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The separate document is a big problem. Like I understand that. So what you're basically saying, or what she's saying, is from a leadership perspective, they have a practice that the documentation should be separate from the code, and that just doesn't do very well in these citizen dev environments. It becomes outdated, not accurate, difficult to understand, difficult to talk about. You make one change and all of a sudden you've got to change 50 different places of documentation where you changed a variable or you changed a setting.
Also remember, one of the inherent part of the inherent nature of no code, low code is that it is itself fairly self-explanatory, right? It's intended
self-discoverable.
It's much different than somebody sitting down and just writing a bunch of code.
Yeah, you want to know what this button does? Look at the on click of the button. Right.
Yeah.
Like we're on the on select. Yeah. It's a different paradigm.
It's built into it. Yep.
But it's difficult for people to understand it, especially in a highly regulated environment.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you everybody for joining, and we'll see you again in a month. And then feel free to send us a note. We'll add them to the next office hours.